As promised earlier in the show, former Georgia Bulldogs star and Atlanta Falcons quarterback DJ Shockley joins the show. Thank you so much, DJ, for joining us.
Fellas, appreciate y'all having me. Always good to be on with you.
All right, so the big news here, Bill Belichick. We got to start off right there. What are your thoughts on Bill Belichick? Is this the right move? Will this be a disaster? I feel like it's either one of the two.
Chase, I'll be honest, man. You know what? The one thing I like is the Falcons are swinging for the freaking fence. They are up there like Ronald Acuna Jr. Every swing is you're trying to hit it out of the ballpark. I mean, you already went after Harbaugh. You're going after Belichick. You're going after the biggest names. I think they're up to like 7 coaches right now. I'll be honest, man. It'll be interesting whoever they hire. Because even if they hire Harbaugh, they hire Belichick, I think it all comes down to who is going to be your offensive coordinator? Who's going to be the guy that comes over and call plays? Does Bill Belichick lean back on what he knows, which is like a guy like Josh McDaniel, who obviously is looking for a job? Does he go back to those days and say, all right, I know what I did with Josh. I know how successful he was as a coordinator and play caller. Let's go back there. And I think that's the interesting part of it. I think Belichick brings a different kind of just leadership. He brings that aura of, yeah, I've been here, done it. I mean, you won 6 Super Bowls, 17 division titles. This is a guy who's done it. And he's been in one place for a long time. The only thing that I think about when I think about if Bill Belichick comes, he is the type of guy that wants complete and utter control over the entire roster. And he's going to want to be able to pick his kind of guys and his players. And Arthur Blank and Rich McKay had a press conference after Arthur Smith was fired, and they laid out the pecking order. And they laid out, hey, we are the guys who will ultimately have a say-so in it. And I don't know how much Mr. Kraft had in it, but I think over the years, Bill Belichick was a guy who had a lot of say-so. So I think that's also a big part of it. So I think whatever coach brings in for the offensive coordinator is a big question mark. And how much of the organization will the head coach get when it comes to the personnel, when it comes to getting certain guys into the building? I think that's going to be another kind of stepping stone. I think obviously you had that conversation with Bill Belichick as they did on Arthur's big mega yacht. I think that was part of the conversation. I think Arthur's in a place too now where he may adapt. He may change a little bit. He may say, I want to win so much, I'm willing to give you more of the pie. And that should be interesting too. So we'll see what happens down the line. Obviously, Bill Belichick, his pedigree speaks for himself, I'll be honest. And the guy's won. But after you lose number 12, people going to say, hey, you've been questionable. You got 22 wins in the last 3 years without, Tom Brady. Was all your success come from him? That's going to be a big thing that people ask, I think, going forward.
Yeah, Belichick's like the only one in this class that this hiring pool that he didn't have to fire up the resume builder. He just shows up and he goes, he just has his rings on his hand and he goes, you know what you're getting. I'm against the idea of it for the last piece that you just mentioned. That his record the past 3 seasons in a post-Tom Brady world are not encouraging. And to your point, he's had full autonomy in New England. A lot of good, a lot of bad on the personnel side of things. And you said it too. It's clear where Terry Fontenot sits in this organization. He wasn't at the press conference talking about Arthur Smith's termination. Rich McKay even mentioned that his role is subject to change depending on the hire. I'm of the opinion the guy's done absolutely no wrong. In fact, he's done things well and deserves more responsibilities, at least on the pro personnel side of things. The draft, it seems cloudy what he is and isn't responsible for. We know what he's done in free agency, and it's hit home run after home run after home run. So, in terms of credibility in the past few years, Terry Fontenot may have a little bit more than Bill Belichick in that aspect. So I do agree with you that the whole Bill Belichick thing is intriguing if he's willing to give up a little bit of that decision-making power. But like you mentioned, I think an important note in all of this is the potential desperation of Arthur Blank. He's getting up there in age. He wants to win, and he is willing to do whatever it takes, including potentially giving up personnel saying to Belichick.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Now, I think one thing that comes to mind is, as we, record this, a lot of talk, you look at Jerry Jones and you look at how bad he wants to win. And you watch him throughout that ball game. They kept showing him when they lost to the Packers, and you know how bad he wants to win. And you think about it, how far along down the line is he willing to go? Is he willing to get rid of McCarthy to say, all right, I want to bring in a guy like Bill Belichick, who I know who's done it and won. So I think that's kind of the question mark going forward. I think you made a great point, Alex, about my man Terry Fontenot. I mean, you think about bringing in Anya Marty. You think about bringing in Caden Ellis. You think about Jesse Bates, who's an all-pro guy. I mean, he was all, made his first Pro Bowl this year. The question marks come in where, hey, how much of does the drafting, we know he has a big part in free agency, and Arthur and Rich both talked about that, but how much does, they have a say-so in who the next coach drafts? Because whoever it is, they're probably going to give him a lot of autonomy of, okay, here's the guys you like, who are the guys I want to draft, and, hey, Terry, are you cool with it? Because at the end of the day, they want to give this head coach the best opportunity to win for whatever scheme he wants to have on offense, defense, and special teams. So it's going to be interesting to see how much of that freedom is given away from Arthur Blank when it comes to the roster, the team, and the guys they bring in. And I think ultimately the biggest stickler, I think, for any coach that comes to Atlanta and that wants to be the head coach starts number one with the quarterback. And I think in these meetings, that's probably at the top of the list of what would you do if you were the coach of this team? Would you go draft a guy? Would you go get a guy like Kirk Cousins to come in here and be a veteran guy? Or do you go out and get a Michael Penix? Do you try to trade up to go get Jaden Daniels? These are the questions I think that Arthur Blanker is wanting to ask to see where this coach's head is and his responsibilities coming in. But first off, it has to be because, as we've seen this year, that's where you suffer at quarterback. That's where you lost a bunch of games because of the play of that position. And ultimately, it comes down to, can you get that guy to play at a high level? And whichever coach comes in is going to have a huge say-so on who's going to run my team, because ultimately, that may be one of the biggest reasons why Arthur Smith is not the coach right now, because they tied their wagon to Desmond Ridder, who didn't play as good as they probably thought he would be.
I don't even think it's a question. I don't think it's a question. I mean, if Arthur Smith had, Baker Mayfield per se, we'd be in the divisional round right now. I don't think that's crazy to say. I think the quarterback was the single reason Arthur Smith was fired. I do believe he kind of drew the short end of the stick, didn't really get a chance with, that competent quarterback play that you said. I think it's the biggest domino this offseason. I do think it's not the first domino. Head coach is obviously very important. But like you said, I mean, it's a second domino and it's important. So let's just play a what-if game. And I don't want to, corner you into a head coach. But if you had your choice of pairing a quarterback and a head coach, what would it be?
Man, that's a great question. You think about some of these guys around the league who have done some really good things. I'm looking at some of the guys that they have interviewed, like like the offensive coordinator for Ben Johnson for the Lions, a guy who we've seen this year do really good with Jared Goff and the pieces they have around him. And obviously Jared Goff is different than probably closer to Drake May or something like that in the draft. But I think any coach that looks up at this draft and says, okay, we can't get the top two guys, which we think is going to be Caleb Williams and Drake May. If we feel like that's too expensive to go up from 8 to 1 or 2 to get those guys, I think you try your hardest to get a guy like Jaden Daniels. And Michael Penix is a absolute passer, man, of the football. We saw that throughout the run. We saw what he did, throughout, this season, put up the crazy numbers. And I think ultimately it's still going to come down to, hey, what's happening in his career? He's had a couple injuries. He's had a couple ACLs. He's been down a few times. As prolific as a passer he is, I think he's still probably going to be a pretty good pro, but you still don't want to go into the situation knowing, okay, this guy has had this amount of injuries going into the NFL. Now, he may turn out to be a guy who never gets hurt and plays a phenomenal career and is great, who you never know. But I look at the upside of a guy like Jaden, and I'm not just saying this just because you guys are LSU guys. I love watching some Jaden Daniels, I'm going to be honest, man. The way this guy moves, the way this guy goes about his business. I mean, you just look at the numbers. They speak for themselves. throwing the football with his legs. He is a true game changer. And you look at guys who are playing right now who have a chance to go win a Super Bowl, like a Pat Mahomes, who can move around and create. I'm not talking about guys who can go run for 50, 60 yards. These guys can create and make the extra play. Josh Allen, another guy. Lamar Jackson, another guy. You got all these dudes who can make plays and extend after the play. Baker Mayfield, we just talked about how many times these guys can create and make plays. And you just say, hey, these guys are guys who are going to win ball games for you with their arm and their legs. And you know he's got it upstairs, be able to do it at the level he's done it inside the SEC. So I think whichever coach that comes in, I think Jaden Daniels can fit any scheme, to be honest. The guy can throw it. He can run it. He's smart. He's done everything you need to see at the SEC coming in there for the last 2 years. Had really great numbers when he was at Arizona. This is a dude who, Arizona State, who has done it and played at a high level. I think this guy can adapt well to the way the National Football League is made now, and any coach can really form an offense around this guy, considering you got a Kyle Pitts, you got two-headed monsters in Bijan and Tyler Algier, you got monster receivers in Drake London. This is a dude who can find ways to get them to football, and I think Jaden Daniels ultimately fits that for anybody, I think, really well.
Yeah, you're speaking our language. I mean, I think we've said this time and time again on this show that he's the number one guy, and it's really not just because of the LSU thing. I mean, it's everything that you said. Creating off script is the key to the game now. That's how all the best quarterbacks in this league. It doesn't matter if they're the most athletic. Even guys like Joe Burrow, not the most athletic, but he can create off script, get out of the pocket, make big plays downfield, and Jaden Daniels did that throughout. One last question for you on these coaches. We talked about kind of all the high profile. We talked about Ben Johnson. We didn't mention Bobby Slowick, but he's one of those high profile offensive guys. We talked about the old heads and Harbaugh and Belichick. What about this group of kind of like defensive guys that the Falcons have interviewed that probably deserve a chance, but aren't necessarily going to be mentioned in these, the same headlines, the Anthony Weavers, the Raheem Morrises, the Mike McDonalds? Any of those guys jump off the page? Because offensive coaches are great. I think the coordinator hire is, like you said, the key to this. But not every coach that's great in the NFL has to be an offensive head coach. There's plenty of examples right now in the playoffs of that. So what are your thoughts on that? Any of those guys stick out that really intrigue you?
So I think that's an interesting conversation, too, because you look at what Ryan Nielsen was able to do last year. I know the Falcons already tried to block him from different interviews. I think they're really high on Ryan Nielsen. And I think if you bring in a defensive guy and you look at what this Falcons defense looked like from 1 year to last year, you can see grave improvement. Obviously, go out and get Anya Mata. I mentioned Caden Ellis. You're talking about guys coming on, Jesse Bates playing well. Even Nate Landman, who stepped in for Troy Anderson, was a big-time success. And he's alternate on the Pro Bowl team. Like, they found ways to make this defense better, and I think there's a lot of pieces there. So I think if a defensive-minded head coach or defensive-minded coordinator comes here and he's the head coach, he's going to first look at that defense and say, all right, there's a lot of pieces that we can work with here. There's a lot of guys that you're going to be able to get back. You can get back Grady Jarrett, who obviously was a stalemate. Can you talk Calais Campbell and coming back for another year? I mean, the dude, had, I think, like 6.5 sacks this year. He's over 100 sacks on his career. Like, he still looked like, even to that last game in New Orleans, has a lot in the tank. Can you get a guy like that to come back and be another leader for you? I don't mind the defensive guy, but I think ultimately it still comes down to what we just said, Jace. Okay, you're a defensive-minded guy. You know what that side should look like. Make sure the offense matches exactly what you want and can really be kind of a back-and-forth ping-pong of, okay, the defense is solidified. This offensive guy has to make sure he carries his own weight too. So I think that's just as important as you hire a defensive-minded guy. He has to have a mind of, okay, here's the guy I want to run my offense. And I think that's still going to be a big deal. I love Raheem Morris. I remember when he was here with the Falcons, a guy that all the players love, one of those just kind of relatable guys. I mean, even, down to the last game, I mean, even though they didn't play well in their last ball game, Raheem Morris is a guy who brought that Rams defense around and played really well. Any guy who is a defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, and when you watch how that defense plays, and Mike McDonald, this guy knows what he's doing. So I don't mind defensive guys. It'll be interesting to see which way Arthur Smith goes, because you think about, you had, all these. Dan Quinn was a defensive-minded guy. Then you go to an offensive-minded guy in Arthur Smith. Do they go defense? Do they go offense? What do they want for that head coach position. Do you want a more defensive-minded guy or offensive-minded guy? That's going to be one of the tales of where this team goes and organization goes from a standpoint of who runs it, because Arthur Blank has tried both sides of it. So we'll see which way he goes this way. But I wouldn't mind a defensive-minded guy as long as he has a clear plan for that other side of the ball to be successful too.
Yeah, a guy that, does have experience in that is Anthony Weaver. He's a low-key guy, not getting a lot of attention that I, potentially love as a head coach here. Like you said, defensive guy, but on his bio on the Ravens website, he's said to have had a say, a big say, and them hiring Todd Monken, bringing in, a Lamar Jackson MVP offensive coordinator. That's a great hire. I mean, you want to talk about vision, that's
I'm with you. Because, you think about who are the best guys to be able to have a look or an output on what's good on offense is the guys who have to stop it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got a defensive line coach, you got a defensive coordinator who says, okay, all I do is look at offenses and how to stop them. The first thing I know coaches do is, okay, what was the toughest scheme for me to stop? And who was the guy that was coaching that scheme? So that's a good point. Whoever is the defensive-minded guy, like, okay, who's the guy that I have the toughest challenge against? And let's go hire that guy.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that's very clear is there's no shortage of candidates. And we've said throughout this process that the Falcons do have an attractive head coaching position. It's an attractive opening with cap space and draft picks and, basically a ball of clay that you can mold at the quarterback position that not a lot of other organizations can offer. DJ, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, plus. Appreciate it, fellas. Y'all be good and go Dogs still.
Yeah, go Dogs.